The bullet that was meant for his heart ended up shattering her life. 1 second, she was pouring black coffee for a stranger in a tailored suit. The next, the diner windows exploded into 1,000 diamonds of glass. Most people would have run. Most people would have hidden under the counter and prayed. But Clara didn't run. She threw herself in front of him. She took the bullet. She didn't know the man whose life she just saved was Griffin Moretti, the capo dei capi of the New York Mafia. She didn't know she had just started a war and a romance that would burn the city to the ground. This isn't a fairy tale. This is exactly how it happened. The neon sign of Sal's all-night diner flickered with a rhythmic buzz that Clara had long since learned to tune out. It was 2:00 a.m. in Hell's Kitchen, New York, the hour of the wolf when the drunks stumbled home and the insomniacs came looking for salvation in a plate of greasy hash browns. Clara adjusted her apron, the fabric worn thin at the waist. Her feet throbbed in her non-slip shoes, a dull ache that served as a constant reminder of her double shifts. She needed the money. Her mother's medical bills at Mount Sinai Hospital were piling up faster than she could clear tables. "Order up, Clara," the cook. Old Mike bellowed from the kitchen window, sliding a plate of eggs Benedict onto the metal shelf. Clara grabbed the plate and turned her eyes, scanning the floor. The diner was mostly empty, save for a trucker nursing a pie in the corner and him. The man in booth 4. He had come in 10 minutes ago, moving with a silent, predatory grace that made the air in the diner feel heavier. He wasn't from around here. You didn't wear a bespoke charcoal suit, likely a Brioni, given the way the fabric draped over his broad shoulders to eat at Sal's. He had dark hair slicked back but slightly disheveled, and eyes the color of espresso, sharp and unblinking. He hadn't looked at the menu. He had just asked for coffee black and sat with his back to the wall, eyes fixed on the front door. Clara approached his table, the pot of coffee in her hand. "Top off, sir." The man didn't look up immediately. His hand was resting on the table, his fingers tapping a rhythm on the formica. He wore a heavy gold signet ring on his pinky and a Patek Philippe watch that cost more than the entire building. "Please," he said. His voice was a low rumble, like a luxury car idling. As she poured, Clara noticed something else, a small smear of red on the cuff of his crisp white shirt. Fresh blood. She paused, the stream of coffee faltering for a split second. The man's eyes snapped up to meet hers. They were intense, terrifyingly intelligent. He saw her notice the blood. He didn't flinch. He just held a finger to his lips, a silent command. "Rough night?" Clara asked, her voice surprisingly steady. She'd seen trouble in Hell's Kitchen before. You didn't ask questions if you wanted to stay healthy. "You could say that," he replied. He reached into his jacket pocket. For a second, Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, fearing a gun. Instead, he pulled out a crisp $100 bill and slid it under the sugar dispenser. "For the coffee." And the silence. Clara stared at the bill. "Sir, the coffee is $2. Keep the change." Before she could argue, the sound of screeching tires tore through the quiet night outside. A black SUV headlights killed, jumped the curb and slammed into the fire hydrant just outside the diner's large front window. The man in booth 4 moved before Clara even registered the threat. He didn't panic. He reacted with the precision of a soldier. He kicked the table over, sending the mugs crashing, creating a makeshift barricade. "Get down!" he roared, his voice cracking like a whip. But Clara was frozen, standing in the open aisle, tray in hand. The front door kicked open. Two men in ski masks burst in the dull metal of suppressed submachine guns catching the neon light. They raised their weapons, aiming directly at the overturned table where the stranger was crouching. The stranger Griffin popped up a silver Beretta, appearing in his hand as if by magic. He fired twice. Pop, pop. The first gunman stumbled back, clutching his shoulder. But the second gunman swung his weapon wide. He wasn't aiming for Griffin. He was just spraying the room to suppress him. The barrel swung toward the open aisle, toward Clara. She saw the gunman's finger tighten on the trigger. Time seemed to liquefy, slowing down to a crawl. She saw Griffin's eyes widen. He was too far away to pull her down. He lunged, shouting her name, though he didn't know it. Clara didn't think. She didn't calculate the odds. She just saw a human being about to be slaughtered. Adrenaline, hot and electric, flooded her veins. Instead of dropping to the floor, she threw herself forward, tackling the stranger back behind the cover of the booth, just as the air filled with the deafening roar of automatic fire. Rat-a-tat-tat-tat. Glass exploded. Ketchup bottles shattered, spraying red mist that looked too much like blood. Splinters of wood flew like shrapnel. Clara felt a sledgehammer blow to her side. It didn't hurt at first, it just felt like a massive, breathless pressure. She gasped, collapsing onto the stranger's chest behind the overturned table. Griffin returned fire blindly over the table, suppressing the gunman long enough for the SUV to peel away, tires smoking. Silence rushed back into the room, ringing in their ears. Griffin looked down. His pristine suit was ruined now, soaked in a dark, spreading stain. But it wasn't his blood. "Hey," he said, his voice dropping to a frantic whisper. He holstered his gun and pressed his hands against her waist. "Hey, look at me. Stay with me." Clara blinked. The diner ceiling was spinning. Did I get it on your suit?" she murmured, her mind hazing over. Griffin Moretti, the man known as the Reaper in the underworld, looked at the waitress bleeding out in his arms, his face usually a mask of stone twisted into something raw. "Forget the suit," he growled. He ripped off his tie and pressed it hard against the wound in her abdomen. "You saved my life. Why did you do that? Instinct," she whispered, her eyes fluttering shut. "Just instinct." "Stay awake," Griffin shouted, looking around the destroyed diner. Old Mike was cowering in the kitchen, dialing 911. Griffin grabbed Clara's face with one hand, his thumb stroking her cheek, leaving a smear of blood. "My name is Griffin. You hear me? You're going to live. I swear it on my mother's grave. You're going to live." The last thing Clara heard before the darkness swallowed her was the wail of sirens and the stranger's voice promising her the world if she just took one more breath. The first thing Clara noticed was the smell. It wasn't the antiseptic, bleach-heavy scent of Mount Sinai's charity ward. It smelled like fresh lilies and expensive leather. She opened her eyes. She wasn't in a curtained-off triage bay. She was in a private room that looked more like a hotel suite than a hospital. Mahogany paneling lined the walls. A massive flat-screen TV hung opposite the bed. Through the floor-to-ceiling window, she could see the sprawling skyline of Manhattan, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. She tried to sit up, but a sharp, hot pain in her side pinned her back against the high thread-count pillows. "Careful," a deep voice said from the corner. Clara turned her head. Griffin was sitting in a leather armchair reading the Wall Street Journal. He looked different. The torn, bloody suit was gone, replaced by a fresh navy three-piece suit that fit him perfectly. He looked rested, shaven, and terrifyingly handsome. He folded the paper and stood up, walking to her bedside. "Where am I?" Clara croaked. Her throat felt like sandpaper. Griffin poured a glass of water from a crystal carafe and held it to her lips. She drank greedily. "New York Presbyterian, the VIP wing," Griffin said softly. "You've been out for 3 days. The bullet nicked your liver, but the surgeons were excellent. The best money can buy." Clara's eyes widened. "VIP wing surgeons, I don't have insurance for this. I can't pay for this." Griffin let out a short, dry laugh. It wasn't mocking. It sounded almost incredulous. "Clara, you took a bullet for me. You really think I'm going to let you see a bill?" "Who are you?" Clara asked, the memory of the gunfight rushing back. The way he handled the gun. The SUV. The look in the gunmen's eyes. "You're not just a businessman." Griffin pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. He rested his elbows on his knees, leaning in. "No, I'm not. My name is Griffin Moretti." He waited for a reaction. Clara frowned. "Should I know that name?" Griffin looked surprised, then pleased. "It's better that you don't. Let's just say I run a very large family business, and sometimes our competitors get aggressive." "Aggressive?" Clara scoffed, then winced as her stitches pulled. "They shot up a diner with machine guns. That's not aggressive, that's war." "It is war," Griffin admitted darkly. "The Rossi family has been trying to encroach on my territory in the meat-packing district. That hit was an escalation, a mistake they will regret." His eyes went cold, a terrifying shift that made the temperature in the room drop. Then just as quickly, the warmth returned as he looked at her. "But we aren't talking about them. We are talking about you. You saved my life, Clara. In my world, a debt like that is sacred." "It was nothing," Clara mumbled, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "I just reacted." "It wasn't nothing," Griffin insisted. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He placed it on the bedside table. "Your mother's medical bills at Mount Sinai have been paid in full. The mortgage on your apartment in Queens paid off. And I've set up a trust in your name." Clara stared at him, her mouth agape. You stalked me." "I investigated the person who saved me," Griffin corrected. "I needed to know who you were, and I found out you're a woman carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. I'm taking that weight off." "I can't accept that," Clara said, trying to sit up again. "I don't want your blood money." Griffin's expression hardened slightly. "It's not blood money. It's gratitude. And you don't have a choice regarding the next part." "What next part?" Griffin stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city. "The men who attacked us, they saw your face. They know you saved me. In their eyes, that makes you an ally of the Moretti family. And that makes you a target." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you can't go back to the diner. You can't go back to your apartment." Griffin turned to face her, his silhouette framed by the skyscrapers. "Until I deal with the Rossis, you are coming with me." "Coming with you where?" "To my estate in the Hamptons. It's a fortress. You'll be safe there." "I'm not going anywhere with a mobster," Clara spat out. Griffin walked back to the bed. He leaned over, placing a hand on the railing, trapping her with his gaze. "Clara, please. I am not asking. If you walk out of that door, you will be dead within the hour. Victor Rossi doesn't leave loose ends. You are under my protection now, whether you like it or not." Just then the door to the hospital room burst open. A massive man, easily 6'5", with a shaved head and a scar running down his cheek, stepped in. "Boss," the giant rumbled. "We got a problem. Two men in scrubs just bypassed security at the elevator. They're carrying heavy bags. Griffin's face transformed. The charming billionaire vanished. The killer returned. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out his gun. "Can you walk?" he asked Clara. I think so," she stammered, terrified. "Good." Griffin hit a button on the wall, killing the lights in the room. He grabbed Clara's hand, his grip like iron. "Because we're leaving. Now." The darkness in the hospital room was absolute, save for the sliver of light creeping under the doorframe. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic counterpoint to the dull, throbbing ache in her side. Griffin's hand was clamped over her mouth, not aggressively, but with a firm, necessary pressure to ensure total silence. She could feel the heat radiating off him. The tension coiled in his muscles like a steel cable waiting to snap. The footsteps in the hallway stopped right outside their door. The handle turned slowly. Griffin didn't wait. He knew the rhythm of violence better than anyone. As the door creaked open, revealing the silhouette of a man holding a suppressed pistol, Griffin moved. He shoved Clara gently toward the corner behind the door and lunged. It was brutal and efficient. Griffin grabbed the assassin's wrist, twisting it upward until bone snapped. The gun clattered to the floor. Before the man could scream, Griffin drove a knee into his midsection and followed it with a vicious right hook that knocked the man cold. The second assassin, standing just inside the doorway, raised his weapon. But he was too slow. A massive shadow emerged from the hallway behind him, Rocco Griffin's enforcer. Rocco wrapped one arm around the man's neck in a sleeper hold. The struggle lasted 3 seconds before the man went limp, dragging Rocco down with him. "Clear," Rocco grunted, stepping over the unconscious body. "We have to move," Griffin said, turning to Clara. He didn't ask if she was okay. There was no time. He scooped her up into his arms, ignoring her gasp of pain as the movement jostled her stitches. "Hold on to me." They didn't take the elevators. Griffin carried her down 4 flights of emergency stairs, moving with an agility that belied his size. Clara buried her face in his neck, smelling gunpowder, expensive cologne, and fear. Not his fear, hers. They burst out into the sub-basement parking garage. It was damp and smelled of oil and concrete. Waiting in a reserved spot was a matte black Mercedes Maybach, its engine already purring. Rocco opened the rear door, and Griffin deposited Clara gently onto the cream leather seats before sliding in beside her. The doors locked with a heavy, reassuring thud that told her this wasn't just a luxury car. It was a tank disguised as a limousine. "Go," Griffin ordered. Rocco peeled out of the garage tires, squealing on the polished concrete. As they sped up the ramp and onto the streets of Manhattan, Clara saw police lights flashing near the hospital entrance in the rearview mirror. They were headed south, away from the chaos, toward the Queens Midtown Tunnel. Clara slumped against the door, exhausted and overwhelmed. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her trembling. "Drink this," Griffin said, pulling a bottle of water from a chilled compartment between the seats. She took a sip, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped it. Did you kill those men back there?" Griffin looked out the tinted window, watching the city lights blur past. "No, not today. Too much heat in a hospital. But they'll wish they were dead when Victor Rossi finds out they failed." Victor Rossi. Clara tested the name. It tasted like ash. "He's the one who wants you dead. He's the one who wants everything I have," Griffin corrected, turning his intense gaze back to her. "And now he knows you're the reason he didn't get it." He reached out his fingers gently, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. The touch was startlingly tender, at odds with the violence she'd just witnessed. "I am sorry, Clara. I never meant for an innocent to be dragged into this life. My life. It's a little late for apologies, she murmured, closing her eyes. The movement of the car was lulling her back into a haze of pain medication and fatigue. Sleep, Griffin commanded softly. When you wake up, we'll be safe. Safe. It was a word that suddenly felt very foreign to Clara. Clara woke up to sunlight streaming across her face, not the harsh city sun, but something softer filtered through salt air. She sat up, clutching her side. The pain was a dull ache, now manageable. She looked around. She was lying in a bed, massive enough to sleep 4 people, draped in Egyptian cotton. The room was cavernous, decorated in minimalist shades of cream and driftwood. She swung her legs out of bed, noting she was wearing silk pajamas that definitely weren't hers. She walked slowly to the French doors and opened them. The ocean air hit her first, cool and bracing. She stepped out onto a stone balcony. Below her was an expanse of manicured green lawn leading down to a private beach. The Atlantic Ocean crashed against the shore. It was breathtakingly beautiful. It was also terrifying. She looked to the left and saw a 12-foot stone wall topped with wrought iron fencing that bordered the property. To the right, a guardhouse with 2 armed men standing outside. This wasn't a home. It was a fortress. A soft knock on her bedroom door made her jump. A severe-looking woman in her 50s, with grey hair pulled back in a tight bun, entered carrying a tray. "Good morning, Miss Evans," the woman said, her voice crisp and professional. "I am Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper. Mr. Moretti asked that you bring this tray to the terrace when you were ready. He's waiting for you for breakfast." On the tray was a fresh change of clothes, linen trousers, and a soft cashmere sweater and toiletries. 20 minutes later, showered and dressed, Clara was led downstairs by Mrs. Gable through a house that resembled a museum more than a home. Marble floors, towering ceilings, and art on the walls that she recognized from textbooks. A genuine Modigliani hung casually in the hallway. She found Griffin on an expansive stone patio overlooking the ocean. He was dressed casually in dark jeans and a black polo shirt that emphasized the muscle in his arms. He was on the phone, speaking rapid-fire Italian. His voice was hard, authoritative. When he saw her, his expression softened instantly. He hung up without saying goodbye. "Clara, you look better," he said, standing to pull out a chair for her at a glass table laden with fruit pastries and espresso. "Where am I, Griffin?" she asked, ignoring the chair and standing at the edge of the patio. "East Hampton," he said. "My family's estate. You are perfectly safe here. The security is state-of-the-art. No one gets within a mutule of this place without me knowing." "How long?" she asked. Griffin poured 2 cups of espresso. "How long for what? How long until I can go home to my apartment, to my job at Sal's?" Griffin stopped pouring. He set the pot down with a deliberate clink. He walked over to where she stood by the railing. "Clara, you need to understand something. The life you had before that night in the diner, it's gone." Clara felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze. "What do you mean, gone?" "Sal's is boarded up. The police investigation has it listed as a gang-related shooting. Your apartment, it's not safe. Rossi has eyes everywhere in the city. If you go back, they will snatch you off the street just to get to me." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. It was all too much. Her mother's illness, the double shifts, the constant struggle to keep her head above water. It had been hard. But it had been hers. Now it was erased. "So what am I then?" she whispered, her voice trembling with anger and fear. "Am I your prisoner?" Griffin reached out, cupping her face in his hands. His thumbs traced her cheekbones. The intensity in his eyes held her captive more effectively than any wall. "You are not a prisoner, Clara. You are my guest. You are under my protection. And until I eliminate the threat against us, this is your home." "Your home is built on blood," she accused, pulling away from his touch. "Yes," Griffin admitted, his voice devoid of apology. "It is. I am a bad man, Clara. I have done terrible things to protect what is mine, and right now—" He stepped closer, his body radiating heat, his scent enveloping her. "Right now, the most precious thing I have to protect is you." The declaration hung in the salty air between them. It was possessive, terrifying, and undeniably seductive. Clara looked at the man who could order deaths with a phone call and saw the raw vulnerability in his eyes when he looked at her. She realized then that the bullet in the diner wasn't the only thing that had struck her heart that night. She was trapped in a golden cauvima, a beautiful, lethal predator, and God help her, she wasn't sure she wanted to escape. 2 weeks bled into 3. The estate in the Hamptons was a paradise, but to Clara it felt like a gilded cage. She spent her days wandering the cliffs, watched always by armed guards who stood like statues in the distance. She worried about her mother, though Griffin assured her that she had been moved to a private facility in Zurich, far from Rossi's reach. The tension between Clara and Griffin was a physical weight in the house. He was distant during the day, locked in his study, conducting a war she couldn't see. But at night they would dine together. One evening a storm rolled in off the Atlantic. Thunder rattled the pane-glass windows, and the power flickered and died, plunging the mansion into darkness. Clara found Griffin in the music room, illuminated only by the flashes of lightning. He wasn't pacing or shouting into a phone. He was sitting at a grand Steinway piano playing. The melody was haunting Chopin's Nocturne in C-sharp minor. She stood in the doorway, mesmerized. The ruthless crime lord played with a tenderness that broke her heart. He stopped without turning around. "My mother taught me," he said, his voice low, "before my father was killed, before I had to become this." Clara walked into the room, the hem of her silk dress brushing the floor. "You don't have to be this, Griffin. You could leave. You have enough money to disappear." Griffin turned on the bench, his face shadowed. "You think I do this for money? I have more money than God. I do this because if I leave, the wolves who come after me will be worse. Men like Victor Rossi don't just want power, they want suffering. I hold the line. I keep the chaos organized." "And what happens when the chaos consumes you?" Clara asked, stopping just inches from him. Griffin stood up. In the darkness, his eyes were black pools. "It already has. Until you." The air left the room. The chemistry that had been simmering since the diner boiled over. Griffin reached out his hand, trembling slightly, and traced the line of her jaw. "I tried to keep my distance," he whispered, his voice rough. "I tried to remember that you are innocent, and I am damned. But I can't. I look at you and I don't see a waitress. I see the only real thing I've ever known." "Griffin," Clara breathed. He didn't give her a chance to retreat. He leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate, a collision of 2 worlds. Clara didn't pull away. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, forgetting the blood on his hands, forgetting the danger. In that moment in the dark of the storm, he wasn't a monster. He was just a man who needed to be saved. They broke apart only when the emergency generator kicked on, flooding the room with light. Griffin rested his forehead against hers, his breathing ragged. "I need to teach you something," he said, suddenly pulling back. What? Clara asked, dazed. How to shoot? Griffin, No. He cut her off, his eyes hard again. Tonight proved something. I am distracted. And if I am distracted, I might miss something. You need to be able to protect yourself if I go down. He took her to the basement range that very hour. He placed a heavy Glock 19 in her hands, molding her fingers around the grip. His chest was pressed against her back, his breath on her ear as he whispered instructions. Breathe out, he murmured. Squeeze, don't pull. Clara fired. The recoil shocked her, but she hit the target. Center mass. Good, Griffin said, kissing her temple. I pray you never have to use it. But in my world, prayers aren't enough. The betrayal didn't come with a bang. It came with a silence. 3 days after the storm, Clara woke up in Griffin's bed. The sheets were cold. He had risen early. She stretched, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. She walked to the window to watch the sunrise. That's when she noticed it. The guard tower near the gate was empty. The patrol that usually walked the perimeter was missing. A knot of dread tightened in her stomach. She threw on a robe and ran into the hallway. Griffin! Silence answered her. She ran down the marble staircase. The front door was standing wide open. The cool ocean breeze drifted in, carrying the scent of salt and copper. Blood. Clara froze at the bottom of the stairs. Lying on the foyer floor was Rocco. The giant enforcer, the man Griffin trusted with his life, was face down in a pool of red. No, Clara gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Clara! Griffin's voice came from the study. He stumbled out, clutching his left shoulder. His white shirt was soaked in crimson. He held a submachine gun in his good hand. Griffin! She ran to him, but he stopped her with a sharp gesture. Don't come closer. We have to go. Now. What happened? Who did this? Carlo. Griffin spat the name like poison. My head of security. He sold us out. He let them in. As if on cue, the sound of heavy boots crunching on gravel echoed from the driveway. They're inside the perimeter, Griffin hissed. He grabbed Clara's hand, smearing his blood onto her skin. Listen to me. There is a hidden panic room in the wine cellar. You go there. You lock the door. You don't open it for anyone but me. I'm not leaving you, Clara cried, grabbing his arm. You're hurt. I can fight, Griffin growled, eyeing the front door. But I can't fight if I'm worrying about you. Go. No. Clara stood her ground, her eyes blazing. She remembered the weight of the gun in her hand from the night before. I'm not hiding in a hole while you die. Give me a gun. Griffin looked at her. Really looked at her. He saw the fear, yes, but he also saw the steel underneath. The same steel that made her jump in front of a bullet in a diner. He didn't argue. He reached into his waistband and pulled out the Glock he had trained her with. He pressed it into her hand. Safety is off, he said. If you see anyone who isn't me, you pull the trigger. You understand? Clara nodded, her grip tightening on the cold metal. Back door, Griffin commanded. The boathouse. We take the speedboat. They moved through the kitchen, Griffin moving with a limp, leaving a trail of blood droplets. They burst out the back door into the blinding morning sun. The lawn, usually pristine, was a battlefield. 2 of Griffin's loyal guards lay dead near the fountain. Between them and the beach stood 3 men in tactical gear. Down! Griffin shoved Clara behind a stone planter, just as bullets chewed up the patio around them. Griffin popped up and fired a burst. One of the men dropped. The other 2 scrambled for cover. I'm out of ammo, Griffin cursed, tossing the submachine gun aside. He pulled a knife from his boot. It looked pitifully small against the assault rifles waiting for them. "Clara," he said, his voice strangely calm. "When I run, they will shoot at me. You make a break for the tree line." "What?" "No." "I love you," Griffin said. It was the first time he had said it. "Now go." He vaulted over the planter, charging the gunmen with a suicidal roar, drawing their fire. Clara didn't run to the trees. She stood up. She saw the gunman on the right, aiming at Griffin's exposed back. She raised the Glock. Her hands shook, but she heard Griffin's voice in her head. "Breathe out. Squeeze." Bang! The gunman's head snapped back. He crumbled. Griffin reached the second gunman before he could refocus. The knife flashed. It was over in a second. Griffin stood over the body chest, heaving blood dripping from his shoulder. He turned to look at Clara. She was standing amidst the ruin of his garden, the smoking gun in her hand, her face pale as a ghost. He limped toward her. "You stayed," he whispered, sounding almost broken. "I told you." Clara said, her voice trembling. "I'm not going anywhere." But the victory was short-lived. A slow clapping sound came from the balcony above them. They looked up. Standing on the master bedroom terrace, holding a glass of Griffin's best scotch, was a man in a white suit. He had a face like a reptile, cold, smooth, and unfeeling. Victor Rossi. And beside him, held by the hair with a knife to her throat, was an older woman with terrified eyes. Clara's heart stopped. "Mum!" she screamed. Victor Rossi smiled, a shark baring its teeth. "Hello, Clara. Griffin didn't tell you Zurich is lovely this time of year, but I thought a family reunion was more appropriate." Griffin froze. For the first time, Clara saw true fear in the eyes of the Reaper. He had lost. "Drop the gun, Griffin," Rossi called down, his voice light and conversational, "or I open her throat and spill her all over your patio." Griffin looked at Clara. He looked at her mother. Slowly, agonizingly, he opened his hand. The knife fell to the grass. "Good boy," Rossi sneered. "Now bring them inside. It's time to negotiate the terms of your surrender." The walk from the sun-drenched garden into the shadowed interior of the estate felt like a funeral procession. The air inside the mansion, usually scented with fresh lilies and lemon polish, now reeked of cordite and copper. Griffin moved with a heavy, uneven gait. His left arm hung uselessly at his side, blood soaking the sleeve of his shirt and dripping onto the marble floor with a rhythmic, sickening pat-pat-pat. He didn't look at the gunman flanking them. His eyes were fixed forward, locked on Victor Rossi, who strolled into the living room as if he were attending a cocktail party rather than an execution. Clara walked beside Griffin, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her hands were raised empty. The weight of the Glock she had been forced to drop on the lawn still ghosted against her palm. She looked at her mother, Martha, who was being dragged by a burly guard. Martha's face was grey with shock, her eyes wide and uncomprehending, staring at Clara as if seeing a ghost. "Sit," Rossi commanded, gesturing vaguely toward the center of the room. The living room was a testament to Griffin's wealth. Towering ceilings, a fireplace large enough to stand in, and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the ocean. Now it was a courtroom. Griffin sank onto the leather sofa, his face pale and beaded with sweat. He hissed through his teeth as his shoulder touched the backrest. Clara sat next to him, her thigh pressed against his uninjured side, offering a silent anchor. Martha was shoved down onto the Persian rug in front of them, weeping softly. Rossi walked to the wet bar. He poured himself a fresh glass of amber liquid, the crystal clinking softly in the terrified silence. He took a slow sip, savoring it, before turning to face them. "You have a lovely home, Griffin," Rossi said, his voice smooth and reptilian. "It's a shame the decor is so cold. It lacks a woman's touch, though I suppose you've been trying to remedy that lately." He smirked at Clara. "Cut the theatrics, Victor." Griffin rasped, his voice weak, but his eyes burning with a defiance that terrified Clara. "You have us. You won. Just tell me what you want." "What I want," Rossi said, stepping closer, "is to watch you bleed. But my investors, they want assets." He snapped his fingers. One of his men, a scar-faced mercenary named Luca, stepped forward and slammed a thick leather portfolio onto the coffee table. He flipped it open to reveal a stack of legal documents. "The unions in Jersey," Rossi listed, ticking them off on his fingers. "The shipping lanes in the harbor, the private equity firm in Manhattan, and, of course, the deed to this property." Rossi leaned over the table, placing a heavy gold-plated fountain pen on top of the papers. "Sign it all over to the Shell Corporation listed there. Do that, and I give you my word, as a man of honor, the women walk away." Griffin looked at the papers, then down at Martha. "And if I don't?" Rossi's smile vanished. He pulled a handgun from his waistband, a matte black Sig Sauer, and pointed it directly at Martha's head. "Then I paint your expensive rug with her brains. And then I start on Clara. I'll make it last, Griffin. I'll make sure she screams loud enough for the neighbors to hear, even over the sound of the ocean." Clara felt a cold wave of nausea wash over her. She gripped Griffin's hand. His skin was clammy, his pulse thready. He was losing too much blood. He couldn't fight. He could barely sit up. Griffin stared at the gun pointed at Clara's mother. The room seemed to stretch, the silence ringing in their ears. "You win," Griffin whispered. The sound was broken, defeated. "I know," Rossi gloated. Griffin leaned forward, groaning as the movement pulled at his bullet wound. He reached out with his right hand, his good hand, and picked up the heavy gold pen. He hovered over the signature line. "Clara," Griffin said softly, not looking at her. "I'm sorry." "Don't do it," Clara whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "He's going to kill us anyway, Griffin. I see it in his eyes." "I have no choice," Griffin murmured. He uncapped the pen. The scratch of the nib against the paper was the loudest sound in the room. He signed the first page, then the second. Rossi watched, mesmerized by his victory. He lowered the gun slightly, his body relaxing. He was savoring the total submission of the most feared man in New York. "That's it," Rossi purred. "Sign away your kingdom, little king." Griffin reached the final page. He paused. "Is something wrong?" Rossi asked, stepping closer to the table to inspect the signature. He was now within arm's reach of Griffin. Griffin looked up. The defeat in his eyes vanished, replaced by a glacier-cold clarity. "I just realized something, Victor." "What? You forgot the first rule of business." "And what is that?" Rossi sneered, leaning in. "Always check the ink." In a blur of motion that defied his injuries, Griffin didn't sign. He lunged. He drove the heavy gold-plated pen upward with all the remaining strength in his body. It wasn't a writing instrument anymore. It was a shiv. The metal nib buried itself deep into the soft flesh of Rossi's wrist, the one holding the gun. Rossi screamed a high-pitched, shocking sound. The gun dropped from his nerveless fingers, clattering onto the glass coffee table. "Clara, the gun!" Griffin roared, throwing his body weight against Rossi, tackling the man onto the floor. It was pure chaos. The guard, Luca, raised his rifle, shouting. But Griffin and Rossi were a tangle of limbs on the floor, rolling over the Persian rug. Griffin was fighting one-handed, gritting his teeth against the agony in his shoulder, using his weight to pin Rossi down. Clara didn't freeze. The instinct that had saved Griffin in the diner took over. She didn't dive for cover. She dove for the coffee table. Her hand closed around the cold steel of Rossi's fallen Sig Sauer. "Drop it!" Luca screamed, swinging his rifle toward her. Clara rolled onto her back, raising the heavy pistol with both hands. She didn't aim. She pointed. She squeezed the trigger just as Luca fired. Boom! The glass window behind Clara shattered as Luca's bullet went wide, spraying shards over her. But her shot found its mark. Luca jerked back, clutching his stomach, and collapsed against the fireplace. "Mother, get her down!" Clara screamed. Martha scrambled behind the heavy sofa, burying her head in her arms. On the floor, the fight was brutal and ugly. Rossi, despite his injury, was healthy and strong. He landed a vicious punch to Griffin's wounded shoulder. Griffin cried out, his vision graying, his grip loosening. Rossi bucked him off and scrambled to his feet, gasping for air, blood dripping from his wrist. Rossi looked around wildly, his eyes locked on a submachine gun dropped by the fallen guard, Luca. He lunged for it. "Griffin!" Clara yelled. Griffin was on his knees, swaying. He looked up, seeing Rossi reaching for the weapon that would kill them all. He tried to rise, but his legs failed him. Rossi grabbed the rifle. He spun around, a manic grin splitting his face. "Die!" he shrieked. Clara raised the pistol again, but her hands were shaking too violently. She couldn't get a clear shot past Griffin. Suddenly, a shadow moved in the doorway. A single shot rang out. Clean, precise, thunderous. Rossi stiffened. A small red dot appeared in the center of his forehead. The rifle slipped from his fingers. He stood there for a second, looking confused, before toppling backward like a felled tree. Clara spun towards the door, raising her gun. Standing there, leaning against the doorframe, was a man. He was huge, his face battered and bruised, holding a smoking revolver. "Rocco," Griffin breathed, slumping back against the sofa. The giant enforcer, who they thought was dead, coughed, clutching his side, where a dark stain was spreading. "I told you, boss." Rocco wheezed, a bloody grin on his face. "Hard to kill." The silence that followed was absolute. The ocean breeze blew through the shattered window, ruffling the papers on the coffee table, the unsigned contract of surrender. Clara lowered the gun. Her entire body began to tremble. She looked at the body of Victor Rossi, then at Luca, then at Rocco, and finally at Griffin. She crawled over to him. Griffin was barely conscious, his skin grey. "Hey," she whispered, cupping his face. "Hey, look at me. It's over." Griffin's eyes fluttered open. He looked at her, then at Rossi's body. Is your mother okay?" Clara looked back. Martha was peeking out from behind the sofa, sobbing but unharmed. "She's safe. We're all safe." Griffin let out a long exhale, his head lolling back against Clara's shoulder. "Good. That's good." "Don't you dare close your eyes, Griffin Moretti," Clara ordered, her voice cracking. She pressed her hands hard against his shoulder wound. "Rocco, we need a car." Rocco stumbled into the room, holstering his gun. "Way ahead of you, Miss Clara. Chopper is 5 minutes out. I called the backup team as soon as I woke up." Clara held Griffin as the distant thrum of rotor blades began to cut through the air. She looked down at the man who had turned her world upside down. His blood was on her hands, on her clothes. She had shot a man. She had watched people die. And yet, as she held him, she felt a fierce, terrifying certainty. The waitress who poured coffee at Sal's was gone. She had died in that diner, too. In her place was someone stronger. Someone who could survive in the dark. Epilogue. The Sunset Promise. 6 months later. The terrace of the Villa Cimbrone in Ravello, Italy, offered the kind of view that poets spent lifetimes trying to describe. The Tyrrhenian Sea stretched out in an endless sheet of sapphire, meeting a sky of perfect azure. The scent of blooming wisteria and lemon groves hung heavy in the warm air. Clara sat at a small iron table, a book open in her lap, but she wasn't reading. She was watching the man standing by the stone railing. Griffin looked different. The hard, predatory edge that had defined him in New York had softened. He wore a crisp white linen shirt, unbuttoned at the collar, and tan trousers. His hair was slightly longer, ruffled by the breeze. The sling was gone, though he still favored his left arm slightly when the weather turned cold. He turned, catching her staring. That familiar, devastating smile touched his lips. "You're analyzing me again," he said, walking over to join her. "I'm just making sure you're real," Clara replied, closing her book. "Sometimes I wake up and I think I'm back in the diner. I think the espresso machine is hissing, not the ocean." Griffin sat down, reaching across the table to take her hand. His grip was warm and solid. "The diner is gone, Clara. New York is 1,000 lifetimes away." "Is it?" she asked quietly. "Rocco says you still get calls. Encrypted ones." Griffin sighed, looking out at the water. Old habits die hard. And power vacuums. They create noise. When the Moretti family stepped down, a lot of small fish tried to become sharks. And I reminded them that the ocean is big." Griffin said, his eyes darkening for a fraction of a second before clearing. "But that's over. I sold the assets. I paid the debts. The Reaper is retired." Clara traced the scar on the back of his hand, a souvenir from the night at the estate. "And what is he now?" "Now?" Griffin leaned in, bringing her hand to his lips. "Now he is just a man who is incredibly late for lunch with his mother-in-law." Clara laughed, the sound light and free. "Mum is going to kill you. She's made lasagna, real lasagna, not that frozen stuff from the diner." "Your mother is more terrifying than Victor Rossi ever was," Griffin joked, standing up and pulling Clara to her feet. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her waist. Clara rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady, strong beat of his heart. The heart she had saved. The heart that now beat for her. "Regrets?" Griffin asked softly into her hair. Clara thought about it. She thought about the fear, the blood, the sleepless nights. She thought about the friends she had left behind, and the life she had abandoned. Then she looked up at him. She saw the man who had shielded her body with his own. The man who had been willing to sign away his empire to save her mother. "No," Clara whispered. "No regrets." "Good," Griffin said, his voice dropping to a husky whisper. "Because I have a question." He reached into his pocket. This time, there was no gun, no contract. He pulled out a small velvet box. Clara's breath hitched. "I didn't have a chance to ask this properly before," Griffin said, opening the box. Inside sat a diamond that caught the Italian sun, fracturing the light into 1,000 rainbows. "I don't want you to be my guest anymore. I don't want you to be my protected witness. I want you to be my partner, my equal, my wife." Clara looked at the ring, then at Griffin. "Is this a command, Mr. Moretti?" she teased, though her eyes were shining. "It's a plea, Miss Evans," he replied, "from a man who would be dead without you." Clara took the ring. She slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "Then I accept," she said. Griffin didn't wait. He kissed her, lifting her off her feet, spinning her around on the terrace high above the sea. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and violent violet, Clara knew one thing for certain. Life with Griffin Moretti would never be safe. It would never be normal. But as she held on to him, looking out at the vast, wild ocean, she knew it would be a hell of an adventure. And that is the incredible story of Clara and Griffin. From a spilled coffee in a Hell's Kitchen diner to a villa on the Amalfi Coast, it proves that sometimes the biggest risks lead to the greatest rewards. What did you think of Clara's transformation? Did you expect that twist with the crystal decanter in the final showdown? Let me know your favorite moment in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this Mafia romance drama, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We have a heart-pounding billionaire revenge drama coming up next week that you do not want to miss. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.